Hi everyone, this is Gia, and I'm here to talk about one of my favorite, most adventurous books of all time, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. When this book was first published in 1885, it was banned for its racial themes and harsh language. Of course, some racial expressions in the book are uncomfortable and outdated to read, but that doesn't devalue the book. Now it's considered one of the greatest classics, and you'll know exactly why after reading it. I never expected to laugh so much at a 19th century novel, but after all, it is Mark Twain. So, to give a super brief description to anyone unfamiliar with this novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is a classic, depicting a rebellious boy named Huckleberry Finn and an African American runaway slave named Jim as they search for freedom. You should definitely add this to your TV Red list if you like witty, rebellious narrators, because I promise you that Huckleberry Finn is really witty and unique. He outsmarts a lot of people throughout the novel, but for the good. And he has a heart of gold and this charming character that will make you burst out laughing throughout the book. If you like adventurous and descriptive settings, then this is the book for you. Also, if you're taking your first steps into classics, I think this would mark a pretty great start because the adventures here keeps you so motivated and captivated that it's just so hard to put down. Unlike most classics that are written with such difficult language, Huckleberry Finn has relatively easier words as well as intentional grammar errors, perhaps because it's written in the perspective of a non adult. There were some dialects that took some getting used to at first, and yes, for those of you who know, I'm talking about Jim's dialect. But that dialect was essential for the story because it added so much to the novel's authenticity. Lastly, I encourage this book for readers who want books with a deep theme. Because on the surface, this novel may just seem like, merely kids adventuring on a raft, but it's really so much more than that. It deals with deep themes of freedom, racism, social norms, justice, and that's just naming a couple. So now this is the deep dive part, also known as the part where you should stop the video and go read if you haven't already done so. I'm going to talk in depth about the book now, so continue watching if you've already read this or if you just don't mind any spoilers. Obviously, we'll begin by talking about the main character, Huckleberry Finn. Safe to say that the biggest reason I kept reading this book was because of how much I fell in love with this character. At the beginning, Huck lives with a widow away from his abusive and awful father. The widow tries to insert all these civilized expectations, norms, rules, thoughts into Huck, but he never understands it. He just feels constrained. Like I mentioned earlier, he has an abusive father who kidnaps him later. And Huck has to fake his own death to run away, and that's when he meets Jim, a runaway slave. I noticed how all the adults in Huck's original home were they weren't the best. They were either abusive attempted murderers who tried to kill Huck, like the father, or they were civilized people who just restrained Huck too much, like the widow. I know that the widow meant well. It's just it didn't work like that for Huck. There were so many pivotal points in the book that made me really like Huck. First of all, like I said earlier, he has a heart of gold. You can really see many quotes that demonstrate the internal conflict when Huck doesn't know whether he should help Jim or not because, society taught him that the right thing would be to turn Jim in, but inside, his consciousness is just telling him that that's wrong. And eventually, his golden heart wins, and he sticks with Jim till the end and makes sure that he gets his freedom. Huck is such an icon because he chose one black individual, Jim, over what civilization has taught him his entire life, and he risks his safety and he goes against social norms by helping his dear friend. Heart of gold, right there, period. Another memorable part is when Huck is faking his identity while staying at someone else's house. And he makes up this name, but the next morning he completely forgets what it was. And instead of panicking like anyone else would have, he cleverly challenges another character in that house by saying, I bet you can't spell my name. And of course, they spell it out for him. And just like that, Huck, it's just them indirectly telling Huck his name. So Huck even writes it down in private so that he'll be ready if someone else asks him to spell it in that same spelling again later in the future, which was very, very, very witty of him. Now, moving on to Jim, who I've already mentioned so much throughout my video. My thoughts on him, well, I know that I've been complimenting Huckleberry Finn and talking about how he's the biggest reason why I kept on reading this book, but ironically, he's not my favorite character. Jim is, because Jim is a 10 out of 10. When Huckleberry Finn and Jim were traveling on the raft, Jim would wait for really long times, even days actually, for the shipmates to return, and he never complained or said anything. He was just so sweet the entire time. And he followed what Tom wanted to do, even though Jim was the one who ultimately had to suffer from the consequences of Tom's unnecessary and cruel actions. And when Tom got shot, Jim risked his own freedom to, not be a slave anymore in order to save him. And consequently, words cannot describe my fury when the so-called king and duke turned him in as a runaway slave. I was livid. Now, Tom Sawyer appeared like 2/3, 3/4-ish into the book, and when I think of Tom Sawyer, an influencer who focuses on Instagram aesthetics and vibes comes into mind. No hate intended here. It's just because he wants to experience all these adventures that he reads about, kind of like how influencers see stuff online and try to replicate that same aesthetic. I mean, I say this because Tom was thrilled at the honor, apparently, of being shot in the calf of his leg. I got frustrated with this though because Jim's freedom was on the line and Tom kept insisting on rescuing Jim in the way that they do in the books and movies. I was like, mate, this is Jim's chance to be free. You can't play around with this, And Jim asked Huck and Tom to help him cut the chains off his leg so that he could escape immediately. But Tom explains to Jim his stylish and time-consuming plan, which Jim accepts. Not to mention that Huckleberry Finn and Tom saw the legs of his bed, and all three of them eat the sawdust together to hide the evidence, which gives them a terrible stomachache. Yet again, Tom Sawyer's idea. And that's not even it. Tom makes Jim get bitten by spiders and rats so that he can use his blood afterwards to write in his journal, since all people who escape should have journals. I'm sorry, what? Mate, just get poor Jim out. Oh, and another person that I felt bad for was Tom's uncle and aunt, because they got their things stolen, first of all. They fought because of a misunderstanding planted by the boys, and they were tricked and lied to. And all they did, they were just warm and hospitable hosts who treated Huck and Tom with nothing but kindness. I honestly felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest when the boys confessed everything at the end to them. The book had a good and happy ending, but I do wish that Jim knew earlier that he was freed the whole time. Because Tom was planning on helping Jim escape and then keeping Jim's freedom a secret for a few more adventures before telling him, oh, actually, you've been free this whole time and I've been, not telling you. And despite Tom's great plan that he had in store for Jim, Jim still had the right to know and be saved from Tom's uncle and aunt's captivity. This video focused a lot on the characters rather than the plot, because for me, the characters were the first and majority of what came into mind when I was thinking about this book. What makes this book so unforgettable isn't just the adventure, but the characters who bring that adventure to life. There's, witty Huck with his heart of gold, loyal Jim and his kindness, and Tom with his wild and reckless schemes. See, these characters will always stay with you even after you finish the book. And it's these brilliant characters that make The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn one of the greatest classics of all time. Thank you for listening.